I hope you're ready for Election Day because it's going to be a hot one, and the weather looks to be on the warm side as well. Temperatures in the upper 70s.
Already lining up at the polls in what looks like a record-breaking turnout for Arizona.
La más disputada es la carrera por la gobernación entre Katie Hobbs y Kari Lake. Los ojos de la nación están puestos en el...
Stay tuned to 550 KF YI later on tonight as we broadcast the results live after polls close.
And for governor right now, the race is a dead heat.
Both of those candidates are neck and neck.
Katie Hobbs announced that she will not debate Kari Lake.
Kari Lake is scared to sit down and have an in-depth conversation.
She's the one who's afraid to take the debate stage.
Why then not get on the debate stage and debate her?
This is the second time this year Hobbs has avoided a direct debate involving a political opponent.
Katie Hobbs' lead shrunk.
The polls were close in 2020 and yet again here in 2022.
We are, ready for whatever challenges might come following this election.
Votes that are coming in are going our way.
We are following breaking news in Phoenix, Arizona, the capital of Phoenix there in Maricopa County seems to be having massive trouble.
One of the tabulators is not working.
Oh, nothing's working in the last half hour.
So 25% of them are being misread.
She tried to vote in Scottsdale and her ballot was rejected 20 times.
We've got about 20% of the locations out there where there's an issue with the tabulator.
We know that Hobbs has repeatedly said that Arizona's elections are safe and secure.
It's going to go down here number 3.
Does that mean it'll take a little longer to count? 1 week after Election Day, and the governor's race is still undecided.
There are still hundreds of thousands of ballots left to be counted.
Still being counted.
It usually does take this long. The difference is the races aren't always this close.
For it to happen now in this way is kind of strange.
We're getting some word from the control room about a call here, if I'm not mistaken. Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs is, in fact, the winner.
And it's a good day for democracy. We can all take a big sigh of relief, but the work goes on.
People know something wrong is going on, and they don't quite know what or where or how they can fight it, but there is a feeling that something's not right.
Can people be confident their vote will count?
There's so many areas where there's so much fraud going on.
I don't know how fair the Arizona Elections Board is.
It's already set up the way it's gonna go, so what more could my vote do?
Elections are the people's elections. These are your votes. These are the people's votes. The very idea that citizens shouldn't know exactly what happens when they cast a ballot, that it shouldn't be transparent and open, that is an anathema to a free society.
Perhaps the biggest yet for the midterm elections in Arizona. It was here where ballots in the last election were perhaps the most scrutinized of any state in 2020.
Arizona midterm was all over the media. There was a lot of controversy over the machines breaking down during Election Day on November 8th and creating long lines and lots of chaos and people couldn't vote. And so I was kind of paying attention to it, but I was also working on other cases.
Things started off pretty well.
Yeah, right at 6 a.m.
And then went downhill from there. So a few hiccups to start our election day here in Arizona, really the last thing we need.
The lines were outside the building, wrapped around the building. I personally stood in line 3.5 hours.
The point is, we come at 6 o'clock this morning, and my wife stayed, my son stayed, he was late to work. I had to go teach, so I went to school. She was here till 8:30 to get her vote cast. I come back after school, it's too busy. I take my granddaughters home. I come back, and now they're telling us that it won't print, and we have to go other places.
Right now, yeah.
There's got to be at least 100 people in line, at least.
And they're telling you to go somewhere else.
Correct.
So no one's trying to deceive anybody.
Of course not on election day. That would never happen, right? No, that would never happen.
Any issues so far at any of the voting centers?
We have one little tabulation thing that we're looking into at the Burton Bar Center, but nothing that's inhibiting people from casting their ballot and being part of this process.
Multiple voter records found. Please raise your hand for assistance.
There you go.
See,
Like,
that's
who is
Michael.
that?
We've already had almost 44,000 people show up this morning, check in, and be available to vote. And things are going great out there.
Nothing to see here. Please disperse. Nothing to see here, please.
It is the most absurd thing I have seen, and this is actually playing out in real life.
So many ballots being rejected by the machines at an extremely high amount.
So if you vote in person, in theory, if everything works right, you insert your ballot into the tabulator, and you are the chain of custody.
First of all, we're trying to fix this problem as quickly as possible, and we also have a redundancy in place. If you can't put the ballot in the tabulator, then you can simply place it here in where you see the number 3, and this is a secure box where those ballots will be kept for later this evening, or we'll bring them in here to Central Count to tabulate them.
How do you know that every ballot that was supposedly rejected by the tabulator was put in and not other ballots?
If you're applying the concepts of a supply chain, right? Each additional transfer, each movement of the item makes the chain of custody, makes the system more complex. The issues with the tabulators sometimes, the issues with the printers, causing people to wait in line for many, many hours. It's almost like they're trying to drive more and more people to voting by mail and away from showing up in person.
On November 14th, I got a call from somebody I know. This person asked me to get on a conference call with a bunch of other attorneys and other people, including Carrie, to give my thoughts on the viability of an election challenge. I gave my view that there was a case to be filed, and it was like being thrown into a maelstrom.
I don't trust you going to box for you. Never been.
No, no way.
I'll come back.
Election-denying Republican who lost her November race to become Arizona's governor is now challenging her election results in court.
Republican Carrie Lake has filed an election-related lawsuit.
Judge allowing 2 of the 10 claims to proceed. His campaign manager called Lake's lawsuit a sham.
We're talking to the tune of tens of thousands of votes. Witnesses on both sides of the debate will take this.
There are literally thousands of voters, many of whom were complaining of problems.
Is it working? If these machines are working, this is a big issue. What is against law?
Photos and videos.
No, I can have a video if this machine's not working. This is not okay. Like, this is wrong.
And there were election workers.
The one tabulator that was working was consistently rejecting ballots.
One of the printers went down for about an hour. I was an election clerk for the midterm election. On election day, we had several voters come into our site reporting that they had already visited up to 3 separate voting locations where the printers and our machines were not working properly.
No, nothing's working in the last half hour, nothing.
Thank you.
In this maelstrom, you have to conduct an investigation, figure out what happened, do an analysis of what legal claims can be brought, and we put together a core team to start getting information, analyzing it, figuring out what's going on.
We had a conference hall set up in a hotel right near the courthouse. We had volunteers and people from our organization. We had our paralegal, we had attorneys, and everybody was converged in this room. And it was, okay, we've got trial in 72 hours. We've got to get ready. So we were working pretty much around the clock.
Put together one hell of a team, including Clay Parikh, Rich Barris over there, and a host of other people who put their heart and soul into this case.
It was like all of a sudden we woke up, we had a new family, and this whole family was based around this court challenge. It was unique. Any camera that live streams, we capture.
In a secure area around something that is so valuable as these ballots, there needs to be checks and balances that are happening right now. We have so many of the cameras that went down just before we started opening up these boxes and looking at the ballots.
People have just come together to do the right thing, not for money, not for personal gain, because it's the right thing, and it is about our children and saving the future of this country.
We need these exhibits in order. Do we know who Exhibit L1 is attached to?
I was working with Shelby Bush and her team of We the People Arizona Alliance, and she has this fantastic citizen volunteer organization.
My co-founder and partner, Steve Robinson, and I started looking into the elections around 2015, 16, right around the time that the Democrats started screaming that there must have been cheating in the election because Trump won, and there's no way he could have won.
You can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
Brian is my brother. He is a handful sometimes. He's very opinionated.
You know, I gotta shave my nose before you shove that damn thing in my face.
But I've never seen a guy so willing to put everything out there on the line and sacrifice himself the way Brian does.
I was the only lawyer in the state of Arizona willing to take Kari Lake's case because I know what happened in 2022, and I know what happened in 2020, and we have to fix our system.
The system for elections is designed to compress and make it very difficult to develop evidence of fraud. And of course, they just say, well, there's no evidence of fraud. It's a baseless allegations of fraud.
Baseless allegations.
Baseless. Baseless claims.
Baseless claims of voter fraud.
Baseless claims. Baseless claims.
Baseless claims
Of voter fraud.
Baseless claims of election fraud.
Baseless claims of election fraud.
Baseless claims of fraud.
That phrase, baseless allegations of fraud, was repeated regardless of the evidence that showed that there was actual illegal voting and fraud.
About 30 days ago, I started very publicly discussing what the Supreme Court of Arizona and the State Bar of Arizona did in 2019. They went to each of the states and they convinced each of the states that the Russians were going to interfere in our elections pre-election and post-election.
We're interested in finding how many Russians are planning to visit our shores.
That there was indeed Russian interference
In a U.S. presidential election.
Communism was just Russian interference.
In U.S. election.
Russia's hacking of the election.
He was put into office because
It's very clear that Russia succeeded.
Are you planning in the near future to visit our great country?
Indubitably not.
And they convinced the state court systems to create what are known as misinformation boards. You have this taking place while lawyers are watching what's being done to doctors.
I try really hard to give people the information and help them to think, not to tell them what to think.
I think people who spread false information or undermine trust in vaccination at the present time are spreading misinformation that is dangerous, that costs lives, and I think their licenses should be revoked.
They take your livelihood and your ability to benefit patients, which is what your oath is.
But for those of you who prefer to obstruct, spread misinformation, and continue to pursue an extreme agenda out of touch with this state, take note of the results of this election.
And if we look at some of these more well-known attorneys across this country, they don't want to lose their law license. They're possibly facing prison time just simply for saying, I think there might be a problem with our elections.
Lake later tweeted she sued over the use of tabulators in my election. alleging they were prone to failure. The suit was dismissed for standing, she writes. On Election Day, 32% of the machines failed statewide. Yesterday, an Obama judge sanctioned my lawyers for bringing this suit at all.
Lawyers are not supposed to file groundless lawsuits. When they do, the worst that usually happens is the case gets dismissed and the losing side has to pay court costs. Now, in rare instances, though, when a civil action is frivolous enough or filed in sufficiently bad faith or under false premises, the court can sanction the attorneys involved. Well, today, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and other lawyers who sued to get election results thrown out in Michigan faced a federal judge. By most accounts, it did not go well for them.
I believe it was an intentional effort to get attorneys to self-censor to avoid potential sanctions from a bar.
And I think we have to say, stand up. Do you have an understanding of what a balance is?
Everything in the complaint ends at where you see the EPM.
To me, the most important issue is the First Amendment issue, because I don't believe that it is fundamentally possible to have free and fair elections when our local government officials have the power to censor our speech.
It's always the First Amendment, from Wisconsin to Michigan to Pennsylvania to Georgia to Alabama. I've seen enough. And if one man can't do his honorable duty to the oath that he took as a judge, right, then what other place? I have a master's degree in cybersecurity, and I'm also a certified ethical hacker and a certified forensics hacking investigator.
Clay worked for a voting systems testing lab, so he knows how election equipment works, he knows all about the ballots, he knows about the requirements and everything else.
A voting system's value, it's irreplaceable, because it makes the decisions on how your community's led and run as far as your government. And so it has to be protected.
Our right to vote is the most precious right that we as a people have. And the reason for that is it determines whether we keep all of our other rights.
Governor-elect Katie Hobbs asking a judge to throw out a lawsuit filed by Republican challenger Kari Lake last week in a 19-page motion to dismiss the suit. She and her lawyers say Lake's suit points to no evidence of Election Day fraud and fails to point out any actual misconduct.
At the Arizona trial, in the complaint, there were 4 issues. There was the tabulator rejections, there was chain of custody violations, signature verification where signatures did not match, and there was also First Amendment violations that we pled. They didn't test any of the tabulators that were used in the vote centers. They tested 5 spares.
The importance is actually testing and using what's actually going to be used by the voters on Election Day to guarantee that everything's going to run smoothly. It should have been verified. It should have been checked. It should have been tested.
$260 of the 446 tabulators rejected ballots with the same error codes that arose on Election Day. At those vote centers, about 60% of them, there were lines out the door, hours-long voting. People gave up. People have jobs.
We watched on the news as these election officials said, we've got everything under control, everything's fine.
A busy day, but exciting day, and so this is the day we've all been looking forward to, and so hopefully we take a moment to appreciate that.
Technology issues sometimes happen, and the county is prepared with backup plans to allow voters to be able to, cast their votes securely.
We have 223 voting locations open. They all opened on time. Voters can use any single one of those.
There was no one who came today with a valid ID who was turned away from the polls. So I get questions a lot about why I'm so confident in the elections process. And one of that is because of all the different layers of controls that we implement. So that's if one of our controls, one of those preventative or detective controls didn't work as intended. We have other controls implemented that would catch that and still provide for the security and integrity of the process.
We know in 2020, because of COVID, that mail-in voting became almost universal. There were floods of ballots.
Many Americans are expected to vote by mail for the first time this November because of the pandemic. Across the country, rules vary for when you can get your ballot and when you should return it.
Oh, hey, voters, fill the ballot here. We've all learned how to do a lot from home lately. And now my friends at Maricopa County Elections are making it a cinch to easily and safely vote from home, too.
65 million ballots were cast by mail in 2020. And that was more than double what had been done in any previous election. That's tens of millions of additional ballots on a system that was not equipped to handle it. It was a recipe for fraud.
So when you're flooded with 1 million plus ballot affidavit envelopes, and you got to signature verify them all within, the span of 30 days, how do you do that?
Fontes wanted to send mail-in ballots to all Democratic voters in the presidential preference election. The court ended up blocking him from doing it.
I would encourage election officials to do everything that they can to help voters and to get as many American voices involved in our democracy as possible.
Fontes was then the recorder, contracted with Runbeck to run the signatures through their signature verification process.
Now at 5, claims of widespread voter fraud after the election were of course baseless, but they still created some uncertainty surrounding our ballots, especially mail-in ballots.
So now to calm concerns, a local election technology company opened their doors today to show us the process firsthand. Here's Amy Cutler.
Runbeck Election Services works with 9 different counties here in Arizona. That's 96% of all registered voters. The focus on printing and mailing ballots, and the process starts right here with these reams of paper. Jeff Ellington is a CEO and showed us around the massive facility. And to voters that don't have faith in the process and question the work you do, what's your response?
It's really listen to the people that know, right? Listen to the election officials.
We're really satisfied with the partners that we have right now. They help us advance the ball. They help us provide more secure and stable elections for everyone. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're looking for.
There was a whistleblower, an employee of Runbeck. She explained that the employees, almost as a perk of employment there, were allowed to bring their ballots in and insert them into the inbound scan. Under Arizona law, you have to return your ballot to a designated drop-off location. Runbeck is not one of those.
We have a case against Runbeck. We've had 11 judges recuse themselves.
You can pay a third party to go distribute the ballots. You can pay a third party to pick up the ballots. There's no chain of custody there. There's no verification. This seems to me an invitation to fraud and abuse.
In most jurisdictions, when you pick up the mail ballots from a drop box, you take them to the county. That's where they're processed. That's where they're signature verified, and that's where they're tabulated. Maricopa County uses a third-party vendor for the inbound processing, which adds 4 additional transfers of the ballot, which of course makes the chain of custody much more complex.
Each part of the system is engineered over time to make sure that it accomplishes its particular role, right? So everything from putting our ballots together originally to sorting out all of the legal questions, setting up polling places, making sure that our folks are well trained, ballot tabulation and security, all the way through to reporting. Every little piece has to be coordinated well. We work hard to make sure that those lines of communication are wide open.
In Maricopa County, the life of a ballot starts at Runbeck, or the life of a mail-in ballot starts at Runbeck. They print the ballots, they print the envelopes, they assemble the packet, they mail these packets out. When a voter votes, they'll put it in the green envelope, they'll sign the outside, and that envelope goes to the post office. Maricopa County is supposed to take, according to statute, they're supposed to take custody of it at that point. The way that they take custody of it is they send an employee over to the post office to pick up those ballot envelopes, and they drive them over to Runbeck. So then Runbeck's next responsibility is that they scan those ballot envelopes. So they know exactly who voted based on the voter ID that they scanned from the envelope. and they now have a scan of the signature. Now, the scan that they take of the signature is what they use in signature verification.
We were commissioned by former Senate President Karen Fann to do an overall analysis of the 2020 election and the 2022 election and how that relates to signature verification.
Some of the things we found were voter registrations that were put into the system that had no signature, or they had signatures that belonged to another voter. An example, you've got, Gary Smith. And Gary Smith has signed his name the same way for 15 years. Then a ballot affidavit envelope is voted in the 2020 election, and the signature looks nothing like Gary Smith, and it's accepted, and the ballot is counted. Then you fast forward to March of 2021, and now there's a new voter registration in the system that matches the ballot affidavit envelope instead of any of the previous history.
Asking which signature is used for signature verification, it's not just one from an early ballot request, as an example. Instead, know that we have multiple signature samples on file, including signatures from all the registration forms you submitted. If you're an early voter and we have not contacted you, then the signature we have on file or the signatures are sufficient to be able to make that determination.
This is something that you all were involved in even before Kari Lake's trial in the November 2022 election, right?
Yes, we started working with the Senate. We got access to some of this information, and we started auditing what was happening in the 2020 election. And through that, we were able to determine some of the issues that were, I guess, flaws. We call it the 7 fatal flaws of signature verification.
They provided to us the 1.9 million envelope images with the signatures on the envelope, and they supplied us with 5.3 million reference images or exemplars. We set up a couple of secure facilities, a server, and I wrote the software that interfaces the user or the signature verifier with those files.
If you look up here on the screen, on your left, you're going to see the actual ballot affidavit envelope, and that's the signature.
So that's what's mailed in.
Correct. And then they scan it in and they send those images over to be signature verified by a reviewer.
And so the reviewer is looking at signatures that are on the registration record with the state.
That's
to
correct.
match and compare to see if they're a match, or if not, then they take an exception and move it on to curing, where they can try to identify if that's the real voter or not, correct?
Absolutely. Here's your comparative images right here. So every time a voter fills out a registration form, they're listed here. So if we just open this up for this particular voter, we can look and see the signature on file for him.
And that signature you're pointing at, that's supposedly the signature of the voter that's on the ballot envelope.
That's correct. And if you notice, there are no stamps here, meaning this did not go to curing. This was passed in the first level. So you might say, okay, well, yeah, but we have 4 exemplars, right? So let's take a look at another exemplar. And another.
Wait, and this is all the same voter ID?
And another.
The same person?
Absolutely.
Oh.
This should be the voter. And you can notice that none of the exemplars are even close to matching the signature on this ballot affidavit envelope.
If it didn't go through a curing process and it passed level 1 signature review, that vote counted.
Yes.
That's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
If you're an early voter and we have not contacted you, then the signature we have on file or the signatures are sufficient to be able to make that determination.
This is the same registration record that the signature verification workers were looking at, right?
That is correct.
So
and
I'm
they passed this.
Yes.
What happens when you put a completely different version of that signature in that voter's registration record? You change the identity of that voter because that signature is then used in future elections to verify that voter's identity.
In total, what we're seeing from 2020 is approximately 21% that fail Secretary of State standards either subtly or egregiously. And again, the egregious mismatch is at about 9%.
Well, 9% of 823,000 right there is about 72,000 votes.
That is correct.
That are illegal.
Which would alter the outcome of any election.
And 9% of 1.9 million would be 180,000.
That is correct. The margin of difference, if we remove those, all races are in question at that point.
There's a lot of testing that goes in before an election. There's such things called logic and accuracy testing to make sure that the tabulators can read the ballots. And if there's a problem, full stop, they fix the problem, they retest, and then they move forward when it is functioning perfectly.
The accuracy of these machines is tested before the election. It's done by Maricopa County. It's done by the Secretary of State's office. That's already occurred to make sure that there isn't any tampering. If those machines don't pass those tests, we can't use those machines.
Maricopa certified logic and accuracy on October 11th.
Equipment that will count almost 2 million Maricopa County ballots got a public run-through. It's a pre-election ritual called a logic and accuracy test.
These machines have been tested through and through before Election Day.
Yes, they have. These are the tabulators that folks are using today at our 223 vote centers across Maricopa County. And unfortunately, we've had some hiccups with some of these tabulators.
Before the trial, we had sent out a number of public records requests. And one of those requests was for what are called the system log files for the tabulators. And those are the electronic log files that show every action by those tabulators.
A system log file is exactly like a computer's diary. You write and record everything that happens. For example, in the tabulator. Hey, the tabulator was turned on. It's powered up. It goes through a self-check. Boom, boom, boom. These are all each log entries. You slide a ballot in, it says a ballot was inserted, it was accepted. All right, it gets the next ballot. It's a historical record, date and time stamped, right, of the system as it functions and works.
And I think you were looking at the system log files and noticed a couple of things. I think one of which was they didn't test any of the tabulators that were used at the 223 vote centers. There were 446, I believe. They tested 5 spares, right?
Correct. We don't have a single date of October 11th in any of the slogs for every single tabulator on Election Day. So if it was used on October 11th, it would show the machine starting up and being initialized on the 11th.
The system log file shows they didn't test any of the tabulators that day. The law, Arizona law, requires all deployable voting equipment for the county to be logic and accuracy tested. They didn't do that. So after we looked at the system log files, and you discovered this unauthorized testing on the 14th, 17th, and 18th, MTech has video surveillance of all the actions, at least in most of that center, right?
Correct.
And so I think you guys went to, okay, we know the date, time of this secret testing, I'll call it. Let's see if there's video.
Exactly. We wanted to match the records to what was going on in the room.
And I think you issued a PR request, and you didn't get back the good data. The video was not.
They gave back footage that was all the way across the room. So when you're looking at the video, it's in the farthest corner. You can't see what's going on at the desk.
Well, this is, I think, where Shelby came to the rescue.
Exactly.
Because you record all the live stream video feed 24/7 and store it, right?
Yeah, we've been doing that since 2021, early 2021, just because We can't trust what they're doing in there. And it's interesting because this came from Maricopa's camera feed.
Yeah.
They could have sent that, but they didn't.
They open up the machines on the 14th, 17th, and 18th, and they run 5 or 8 ballot tests on them. Then they performed exactly as they did on Election Day, as you can see, spitting back out the ballot. In multiple instances, we had tons of paper jams where they have to put their hand, you can even see all the other employees here all have their hand up underneath the tabulator to help pull the ballot out so that it wouldn't get stuck in the machine. Everything we witnessed on Election Day, we're witnessing right here in logic and accuracy testing.
They had no tabulator S-log files from the 11th. So why did they not provide the 5 spares that were
Exactly.
tested? So right now we're standing at 2 major issues with the LNA testing.
And then you found on October 14th, 17th, and 18th that after certification that they cut the seals on those 446 tabulators. And this is from the 14th, 17th, and 18th, that time frame.
He and the other employees are going to go through the tabulators and take the seals off, which is breaking the law, and going to remove the memory cards from the tabulators and take them back to the computer where they're going to reprogram each and every one of them.
Yeah, this is the reprogramming of the memory cards that they remembered 7 months after the fact, and only after we caught them doing this unauthorized testing did they disclose that.
When we looked through the files that y'all received, they didn't have any of the seals recorded after this happened.
And this isn't a small matter.
No.
I mean, we're talking about these machines, how they're programmed to read the ballots. And I think that we have seen in the system log files, weren't there warnings that are showing up from the 14th, 17th, and 18th?
Yes.
I think it was warned was wrong MBS settings. What was that again?
The machine behavioral settings, which is a major thing because that's how the hardware, the actual mechanics of the systems evaluates the ballot as it comes through.
You mean how it reads the ballots?
Yes. If there's an error there, you could have vote cast for one person go to another person. It's because the machine's just reading it as what it thinks it's supposed to be.
And I think we looked at these log files after we saw that warning, and there wasn't any evidence in the log files that was fixed, was it?
No, there's no evidence it was fixed. And they also have an issue with the database version being different. Files that get loaded on these compact flash, right? These memory sticks. And when they get loaded on, that's how the machine knows to run it for what election, where if the mark's here, this is who it's voted for, and that's how it records everything in the database. All those version numbers are supposed to match. If they don't, there's an issue. So how could it have been approved software if you get those errors?
It didn't match.
Yeah, it didn't match.
Once that security seal's put on and LNA testing's been concluded, that seal stays on until the end of the election, unless there's some continuity of operation issue and you've got to recover from a tabulator going down or something like that. But then to remove the seals, not to put new seals on them, you just reprogram systems and you didn't even test them.
The whole purpose of that security seal is to say, hey, I'm configured, I'm set properly, the seal's removed. How do you know how many times they've been accessed?
The fact that there's no seal on it so that there's no
Security,
means of
yeah.
determining if somebody did access, some bad actor unknown to Maricopa could have, and Maricopa wouldn't know it because they weren't tracking it.
Doesn't that mean that this logic and accuracy testing that they publicly announced, that they conducted on October 11th with all these observers, that really is just kabuki theater?
Yes.
Have you ever recommended a criminal investigation?
Hell yes.
Okay.
Anything that we go technical is just going to be hypothetical, because that's what they always say. Oh, Clay just talks hypothetical. Because until I pull out my USB stick and actually hack one of these systems in the courtroom, let's just say in certain cases the federal government listened to me, and others they did not.
Okay. On the ones that they listened to you, did it result in a conviction?
Yes.
There's one piece of discovery that you can get under Arizona election contest statutes, and that is you can ask It's not guaranteed, but you can ask to inspect the ballots. So we moved under that statute to inspect the ballots. The defendants opposed. Again, if you're not trying to hide anything, why are you opposing transparency? So Clay, I remember when we were in the storm in November and December trying to get ready for trial and to figure out what happened. We knew that there were ballot rejections, long lines, and that there was complete chaos, but we didn't know why. And I remember a eureka moment.
Man, I saw it in the war room and I wanted to say it, but we had to wait. I was giddy. I'm telling you, I was dancing around like a little girl. I was happy.
We knew what he was going to testify to because we had brought the spoiled ballots to him so he could analyze them.
Clay, what did you find out?
It was a major thing. We were having one of our normal Zoom calls with several teams on it, and then one of the persons throws up a picture of ballot image that they had. And to me, as somebody who's tested these systems for 9 years, it just jumped right out at me.
We said we want to do a random inspection of a select sampling of ballots. Well, the defendants came back and said, well, you have to disclose which vote center locations you're going to inspect ballots from. And we said, no, we're not going to give you a heads up as to where we're going to look. We could have one person do it, so we couldn't have an army going there. We designated Clay.
I go to MTech with the attorneys. We have a meeting. We walk through the warehouse. I'm showing everything. I start to select the 6 sites. We go, we mark the boxes, they collect them. So we start inspecting ballots. I run across the ballots. I ask for a ruler. And everybody is shocked, and they were dismayed, and it was sort of just laughable to me, but you know, don't laugh because it'll just look bad. And so they give me a ruler, they ask the other inspector for one. The other inspector was measuring the font size on the ballot. He had no clue about why I requested the ruler. It was just apparent that their expert didn't have any idea about what he was looking at.
What Clay found in there was fit-to-page ballots everywhere in all 6 of the sample of the vote centers.
First off, I saw the edge of the paper, the hash marks, and then 2, look at the difference in the margin. The machine obviously could not tabulate this in any way, shape, or form because these timing marks are what's read and set and gets the image and allows the software to start evaluating each and every vote cast. So with this margin, there's no way it could be read.
A 19-inch ballot image was being printed on the ballot paper, which was 20 inches.
This was just like, whoa, wait a minute. This is the problem.
Well, I remember when you told me about this, this was a stop the presses moment.
Oh, yes. Yes, it definitely was. It definitely was.
Team 12's Tricia Hendricks joining us live this morning from the Maricopa County Superior Court in Mesa, where all this is set to start at 9 a.m. Tricia.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, quiet out here now, but at 9 a.m. things are going to get started. And this is day 1 of the 2-day trial of Kari Lake. Now, Maricopa County Judge Peter Thompson dismissed 8 of the 10 claims in Lake's lawsuit. But there's 2 remaining claims alleging misconduct with ballot printers and ballot handling.
All right, this is CV 2022-095403. This is Lake versus Hobbs et al. I'll take appearances at the beginning of the day. And please, beginning with plaintiff.
Sir, you'll make your way in front of my clerk. She will swear you in. Scott Jarrett, who was the co-director of elections, we called as a witness in our case in chief. And during that testimony, I started asking him about the issue of, could a 19-inch ballot image be put on 20-inch paper? What would happen if the ballot on demand printer printed out a 19-inch image on the 20-inch paper and ran it through the tabulator?
We did not specifically test for that because in this specific election, because none of the ballots on our ballot on demand printers had a 19-inch ballot. They all had a 20-inch ballot.
4 times he denied that never could occur.
Timing marks on the ballot matter, and it would need to be a 20-inch ballot to run through that tabulation equipment. But we did not specifically test a 19-inch ballot through the 2022 tabulation equipment because there were no 19-inch ballot images installed on our ballot on demand printers.
I was a little bit surprised by his testimony.
Because we knew what Clay Parikh was going to get up and say.
And I actually had planned on having another Maricopa County witness testify after Scott Jarrett, but realizing he had committed himself, we did a change up in the order of witnesses, and I brought Clay up to testify, to bookend it directly in contrast to what Scott Jarrett had testified to. So, Mr. Parikh, it's your testimony upon inspection of these ballots that you determined that there was a 19-inch ballot image projected onto the 20-inch paper. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate.
You heard Mr. Jarrett testify that there was no way that a 19-inch image was placed on 20-inch paper in the November 2022 general election, correct?
Yes.
And is there any way that a 19-inch ballot image placed on 20-inch paper in this election in Maricopa, whether it was tabulated by the vote center tabulator or the tabulators at MTech, that 19-inch ballot image would be accepted by the tabulator?
There's no way a 19-inch image on 20-inch paper could be accepted by the tabulator.
We were getting text messages and people were reaching out. They're like, oh my gosh, did that just really happen?
Maricopa County MTech, that center, is under 24-hour video surveillance. We could see in the conference room where Maricopa's attorneys and Scott Jarrett were prepping the whole night as to what the next day's testimony would be. And so the next day, they call Scott Jarrett up in their case. And he, all of a sudden, changes his testimony. Mr. Jarrett, do you recall your testimony yesterday?
Yes, I do.
And yesterday you testified that a 19-inch ballot image being imprinted on a 20-inch ballot did not happen in the 2022 general election. Did you recall that?
Yes, I recall that there was not a 19 ballot definition in the 2022 general election.
Yeah, but that wasn't my question, sir. I asked you specifically about a 19-inch ballot image being imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper. So are you changing your testimony now with respect to that?
No, I'm not. I don't know the exact measurements of a fit to paper printing. I know that it just creates a slightly smaller image of a 20-inch image on a 20-inch paper ballot.
Slightly smaller image. How come you didn't mention that yesterday?
I wasn't asked about that.
Well, I was asking you, is 19 inches smaller than 20 inches? It is, isn't it? Sure.
Yes.
So when I said, asked you questions about a 19-inch ballot image being imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper, and you denied that that happened in the 2022 general election, did you not think it would be relevant to say, hey, by the way, there was this fin-to-print image issue that we discovered?
Your Honor, I object. The counsel is misstating Mr. Jarrett's testimony from yesterday.
And then he said that they had done a root cause analysis, which is what you do to investigate a problem with an electronic machine, and that they'd known about this since the day after the election. When did you learn about this fit-to-print issue?
When we started doing the audit reconciliation of those DOR 3 ballots, we identified some of those ballots had then a fit to paper issue.
Now, mind you, he had just completely the day before said it could never have occurred. And when was that?
I don't remember the exact dates, but a few days after Election Day.
The unfortunate thing is no perjury charges, and the judge actually called him credible.
Again, you're asking me to speculate about things that I have no knowledge of occurring. So I don't know if it could have been a deliberate act or not. I don't believe that that occurred. None of the ballots on our ballot on demand printers had a 19-inch ballot. They all had a 20-inch ballot. We identified some of those ballots had then a fit to paper issue.
Does that mean you lied in 2020 during the audit? Does that mean you lied about the 2020 election issues?
Was it a lie of omission or commission?
Scott, why are you running from us? You were so brazen on the stand in there. Why are you running?
Scott, did you know the question yesterday? Were you coached by legal counsel to tell the truth today?
Scott, how do you boldly lie like that? Scott Jarrett, what's going on?
So this misconfigured ballot that you immediately recognized, that would be one of the causes of why the tabulators were rejecting ballots on election day.
This is a major cost. This would have made door 3, this is where you have to put it. And the sad thing is once it's in door 3, if it goes back to Central, it's still not being tabulated. No tabulator, whether it's at Central or at a vote center, can tabulate that ballot. Hence, they throw it into door 3.
So then it comes back out, and then at that time, the voter then has the choice to, we can try and run it through again, or they can place it down here in this door number 3.
And that was a tray which would be taken and then counted up at the central count at Maricopa County.
So I put my ballot in, it got misread, but then what was happening?
Put it in there.
Yeah.
And tonight, a Republican and a Democrat will sit and go through all of the misread ballots all over the county.
Okay.
And count them, and it will get counted.
Ballots that are in here will already be, in effect, signature verified, so we won't need to confirm identity, but we will central tabulate them. This is actually what the majority of Arizona counties do on election day all the time.
To go on to door 3 in itself, a door that should have a security seal on it to the end, because they had so many, they would have multiple poll workers at the vote centers with a key to open them and close them because they were getting so full, and it wasn't sealed.
So the central count tabulators couldn't read this ballot either?
No.
And so they'd have to duplicate it?
That's correct. When you duplicate a ballot, the voter's intent for each vote cast on that ballot is the primary concern. And you cannot do that until you check the original ballot with the duplicated ballot to ensure that they match. And the way they run the process, that could not happen. You have to take the original ballot and compare it to the duplicated ballot. You just can't look at it on a screen. It'd be processed and printed in a facility somewhere else and then shipped over and run through a tabulator without that a duplication board and those bipartisan people looking at it and comparing them.
Yeah,
How do you know it's printed properly?
I think the system log files or other records show that they duplicated over 8,000 ballots with this type of error code.
Yes, yes.
But they only admitted to duplicating 1,300. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
7,000 rejections every 30 minutes from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. They never could rebut the fact that Clay found these ballot images in all 6 vote centers that we inspected. This shows that there was intentional conduct to sabotage the election by somebody. Chain of custody is one of the most important methods to provide any security for a mail-in ballot.
Good afternoon, Mr. Valenzuela. Can you please state your name for the record?
Reynaldo Valenzuela.
Can you describe your current employment, please?
I am the co-elections director of Maricopa County Elections Department, overseeing early voting and election services.
Ray Valenzuela testified that Maricopa County did not follow the procedures as specified in the EPM on Election Day because they had said they had a different process for Election Day.
We do, part of our audit review is we do count the Dropbox ballot packets because they are outside of the purview, whereas a federal post office, they don't leave chain of custody from the federal post office once we pick them up, but the ballot boxes, we do make that count.
On Election Day?
On Election Day, no. Because we're not doing Dropbox courier process at that time. It's a different process for Election Day.
There's no other process for Election Day spelled out in the law, and Maricopa County Elections Department doesn't have the authority to change the law.
So it shows, does it not, that you are turning over ballots to Runbeck, correct?
We're turning packets over.
Packets. You have no idea exactly how many you're turning over, correct?
We have an estimate, but we rely on that count, that certified vendor to do that.
A lot of things are occurring in Runbeck election. It is an off-site private contractor. They have provided little to no transparency to us. This is the area where they can flood thousands upon thousands of ballots into the system with no chain of custody.
And the county does not run or operate Runbeck?
It is a certified vendor that we have contract with.
Runbeck Election Services is a private company that proclaimed to not be subject to public records requests.
They gave Runbeck the authority to count their ballots when they have no legal authority to do so.
Here's where it gets interesting. Runbeck records the number of ballots that it receives from MTEC. They did a tray count, and based on the standard 350 ballots per tray, they estimated that for ballots that were received on Election Day, those forms, if you add up those forms, about 263,000. Runbeck then scans those envelopes, which include the ballot, for the signature, and they count them. And they fill out a chain of custody form there. That total was 298,000. It was around a 35,000 ballot difference. Now here's what Secretary Hobbs' attorneys said about these two forms. That Maricopa would know if any ballot was inserted or rejected into the election. We simply took those forms and added them up.
You can look at Stephen Richards' email to the Board of Supervisors. He said, this is after the election, 1 or 2 days after the election. I can't reconcile.
No, we added them up. They're not counted at the individual voting locations. They are counted when they get back to MCTEC, and then they are recounted at Runbeck.
All I want to know is, does anybody know when those ballots leave the polling centers, the voting centers, how many are in the bins?
When the early ballots leave the voting centers, no, they are not counted at the voting centers.
So nobody knows how many are in the bins when they arrive at MCTEC, correct?
Correct.
But according to your testimony, they contain documents that tell you how many are in the bins?
No, they contain chain of custody documents.
And it's your testimony that you count them at MCTEC?
Correct.
That means Runbeck, the people who we have counting them, is telling me one thing, and the number I'm getting for my people is another thing.
That number ultimately doesn't even match the number of ballot images that they scan. Why did they scan in more ballots than they have record of receiving?
Maricopa County had absolutely no idea how many ballots they gave to a corporation, a private, for-profit company that doesn't have our best interests at heart.
Mr. Valenzuela, you had absolutely no idea that Runbeck employees were allowed to inject ballots into the system, isn't that correct?
I did not.
You had no idea. And isn't it true that you had no idea because you do not keep adequate documentation with regards to the number of ballots you receive on election day and give to Runbeck? Yes or no? It's a simple question.
Objection, Your Honor.
The issue with inserting ballots at Runbeck is that there's no documentation of where they came from, right? There's no chain of custody. It creates a situation where if you can insert one ballot, if you can insert 10 ballots, how many could you insert until somebody would notice?
Legal question, but you only have to answer if you have an understanding about it. If you don't have an understanding, it's perfectly fine to say, I don't know. Are you aware that under Arizona law, a ballot is not actually unlawful if it is, the term that's used sometimes is harvested or ballot collection, but if somebody who is not authorized to handle it deposits it, or like what happened at Runbeck, if somebody brings it and inserts it into the stream, but not into a designated authorized drop box. Are you aware that under Arizona law that is not actually an unlawful ballot?
I think the term in the law is an invalid ballot.
Okay. Just 1 minute, Your Honor. No more questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Sunny.
Who's putting these ballots in, or who's removing ballots and then putting other ballots in? If you have no control over this process, how can you trust it?
Hey voters, fill the ballot here at the Maricopa County Elections Department, where my friends are making sure your ballot for the November election is secure and trackable. Our upgraded equipment is certified, accurate, and monitored around the clock. And before your ballot even gets here, we verify every signature to make sure your vote is really you.
The comparison of signatures is one of the most important safety checks for mail-in ballots, to know that the voter who cast the ballot is the one whose vote is being recorded.
The signature by law is the identity of that individual.
So there was a reporter working for the Gateway Pundit who used a public records request to go evaluate envelopes. He looked at approximately 300 envelopes, and he, from that, got about 30 envelopes that he questioned the signature on. And, you know, coincidentally, that matches our experience. And he made a call to several of those, and he found a person who was willing to talk to him. And he showed him the signature on the envelope, and this person said, you know, I sign my signature very consistently, and that is not my signature. And I'll tell you what's more, I did sign and submit an envelope, mail an envelope with a ballot for this election. And that is not the envelope that I signed and submitted.
Signature verification workers are under live stream camera in a room. People can see what they're doing.
When we look at the records that the county put out about how many people they hired to do signature verification, and we looked at the video footage, there's a room here that has 12 people, and there's a room here that has 23 people, and their full-time signature verification staff was less than 50 people. And the 2022 election, they supposedly verified signatures on 1.3 million ballot affidavit envelopes. The math doesn't add up.
There were about 48 workers performing signature review that people could log on to the Maricopa County website and say, oh yeah, they're doing their job. And here's all the training materials that they get before they conduct signature verification. What Maricopa doesn't tell you is that for the 2022 election, for example, there were over 90 other workers who were doing it without any cameras, doing it in their office, could even be doing it at their home. We don't even know who these other signature verification workers were. Why would you go to the length of creating this facade of transparency and public disclosure with 48 signature verification workers under camera and everybody can see, yet behind the scenes you have more than 90 who are doing it at their desk or at their home? Again, they created a facade. The question is why?
A lot of these ballot affidavit envelopes have such egregious mismatches that are approved by these, we call them ringers, individuals who they instruct or whatever happens to just hit enter and approve the signatures.
We had whistleblowers who worked in the signature verification department at Maricopa who testified that anywhere from 15 to 40% of the signatures did not match, yet they were being passed through.
From law firms I used to work for, they know every damn thing I do on my computer. And so there's got to be data that shows how long it's taking these people to approve these signatures, right?
Chris Hansel had done a public records request, and that data shows how long among other things, how long signature reviewers were actually looking at the record signature on file to compare it to the ballot envelope signature to see if it matched.
We got the data, and the data is incredible. You know, the video supports the data supports the video, and it's clear people were not doing the job they were supposed to be doing.
If you're doing legitimate signature verification, we found in our group that it should take more like 20, 30, 40, maybe even 45 seconds to do a legitimate signature verification according to the training that the Secretary of State gave for signature verification. But what we saw in the logs is really well depicted in this video. He is literally clicking through these signatures as fast as the screen will update. So it takes the screen about a second to update. He's taken a second or two to look at each one of these. So this is the image of the envelope, and this is the exemplar or the reference signature. So he is supposedly doing a legitimate evaluation between that box and that box in that amount of time. He's not the only one. About 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the signature evaluation workers are evaluating signatures at that speed. Actually, this worker is much more conscientious. She's taking her time. And so she's a good example of the opposite end of the spectrum. We got these signatures coming in envelopes, and they're going down through this giant drain of signature verifiers that are verifying at this speed. What we found was the people who were speed clicking through had the highest pass rate. The people that took their time, obviously they're gonna find the legitimate mismatches in signature, and that's what we find in the data. So, okay, so this column is user 1 through 151, and then this column over here, this goes in order of speed of clicking. So here we got somebody who did about 5,000 evaluations, and they did it at a 99.68 pass rate. And that's what we find, is the people who are faster, they have higher pass rates. So let's scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we'll see some red numbers down there. See all the 100%s passing by here? Okay, so remember, 1 or 0 seconds, less than 2 seconds, 300,000 signatures were evaluated at that speed. And here we have this group plus the next one, less than 3 seconds, that's 2 seconds or 1 second or 0 seconds. 500,000 signatures passed at that speed.
It is physically impossible to compare a signature, as those workers are instructed to do, at a rate of less than 2 seconds a signature. Maricopa County commissioned the McGregor report. That report came out 5 months after the election. And it came out not by us. This was an observation of somebody Maricopa selected when they observed 4 of the 10 printers all of a sudden randomly starting to print fit-to-page ballots that none of the technical experts could explain how or why occurred. That's either malware or remote access.
For those who don't understand printers, we're talking about 2 different manufacturers. What is the probability and the chance that those 2 systems have the same random issue? If you understand anything about technology or manufacturing, that is just, it's almost impossible.
The fact that that investigative team did not follow up and get to the bottom of why that random printing of fit-to-page ballots occurred is, the elephant in the room. This isn't a game. It's real. That had a real, measurable effect that would have changed the outcome of this election. These are people's votes. The officials that are being elected are implementing policies that affect people's lives.
When people question and they say you have no evidence, you have no proof, the first thing I do is offer to show them the proof. There are just some people that I think aren't ready to see what's right in front of their face.
It should not take looking at system log files, having to do forensic audit just to ensure a component of a voting system function properly. When you look at 2 tables and you see a couple of $100,000 worth of computer systems and machinery up there, and you're thinking, all to go and get a paper ballot that could have been printed, filled in by hand, and counted by hand.
Allowing them to make up the law as they go and follow the laws that they want to and disregard the ones that they don't, it's devastating. It's devastating in terms of the outcome, but it's devastating in terms of people having confidence in the outcome of elections. But how about the minimum? How about we just follow the laws as they exist?
Our right to vote is the most basic and fundamental right we have. They're taking it from us.
But this is what it takes. It is the willingness to sacrifice and to never, ever quit. Because at the end of the day, the truth will win. We've shown the evidence, and at some point, it can no longer be denied and covered up.
How much election fraud do you think is real? Here we go, Joe. You want to go to election fraud? Yeah. That Kerry Lake stuff in Arizona that they're trying to dismiss, it doesn't look like that's invalid. It looks like there's real fraud there. It looks like there's some real shenanigans there. At the very least, there was voting machines that weren't working properly, and it seems very suspicious that a lot of them were in Republican areas. There's a lot of shenanigans. And I think there's coordinated efforts to make sure that certain people get elected. I don't know how far they go, but I know it's not zero.
I think people in the past believed their responsibility to themselves and to their country ended with simply casting a vote. And once that was accomplished, then they could go back and accept the results. That's no longer the case in our country. Your responsibility and your duty goes beyond simply casting a vote. It is to actually get involved. It is, whether it's public records requests, it's to ask questions of your representatives, to demand transparency in elections.
I said, what the hell have I got to lose? Right? My dignity. I may lose my law license, but I will have my fucking dignity.
I do plan on bringing in brand new actions. And so as long as I can take a breath, I will never quit on this. And it may not come quick, and that is frustrating, and it's difficult, because we're up against a machine that is bound and determined to suppress the truth, but it can't be done forever.
Our current voting systems are complicated and messy, and that's by design. Imagine a small business not knowing how much money is in the cash register, or a bank not knowing how much money is in the teller's drawer, or sending an armored car with bags of cash to the central bank without knowing how much money is actually in the bags. It's hard to believe, but as this movie demonstrated, this is how your votes are being handled in many states across our great nation. Banks or corporations don't put up with these kind of lazy accounting processes, and neither should the American people. Your votes are far more precious than cash. Your vote is your future and your family's future. Currently, in many states, your votes are not reconciled and verified at the precinct level. Instead, ballots are shipped off to third-party entities or counted at centralized locations outside of public oversight. Residents of Maricopa County know all about that. And as you also just saw in this movie, mail-in ballots are not secure, and they are a recipe for fraud. We must return to mail-in voting being the exception and not the rule. Election day voting in small precincts with hand counting at the precinct level guarantees the most accurate accounting and transparency in our elections. We as Americans must demand this. Precinct-level hand counting is how most of the country voted before the year 2000. For hundreds of years, this system worked. Even France does it this way now because it's the most secure. Our current system, where we vote for a month and count ballots for days or weeks in back rooms, invites fraud and distrust. This needs to change. We must restore faith in our elections so that everyone, regardless of political party, has faith that their vote matters. Call your state and local officials now. Hand counting ballots at the precinct level and locally verifying the ballot count against machine tallies is the best way to stop fraud. The 2024 election is just around the corner. We must build back trust in our elections before it's too late. The time to act is now. Your future and your children's culture and future is at stake. Demand hand counting at the precinct level. If you like this movie, please consider donating and visiting buildtrustagain.org. Through education and proactive lawsuits, myself and others like me are working to expose the flaws and fix fraud in our systems before it's too late. Americans deserve free and fair elections, and we won't stop until we get that.